What is she doing with my father? Don't touch him. This isn't your place. Calm, firm reply. I've been protecting him from you. Shocked silence. Narrator tone. And in that moment, the billionaire froze, because the maid had just revealed the one truth powerful enough to destroy his empire. The gates of the Blackwood estate groaned open in the dead of night. No chauffeur, no security detail announcing his arrival. Just Alexander Blackwood, billionaire investor, media's favorite mogul, the man who conquered Wall Street before 35, slipping back into his mansion without warning. His shoes clicked against marble floors polished so clean, they reflected his face like water. The air smelled faintly of cedar and jasmine candles, the ones his late mother used to love. Normally, he would have walked into silence, but tonight, he heard voices, low, murmured, rising and falling like waves. One voice was old, weathered, carrying the tremble of years. The other, soft, steady, and startlingly warm. Alexander's heart froze. It was his father's voice, Henry Blackwood, the man who hadn't spoken more than a few broken sentences in years after a stroke had stolen his speech and dignity. Doctors said he would never fully recover. For 2 years, Alexander had accepted that, resigned himself to one-sided conversations, watching his father fade into silence. But here, at nearly midnight, he heard his father speaking. Clearly, laughing even. Alexander moved toward the sound, pulse hammering, and then he saw them. In the dim glow of the study, Henry Blackwood sat in his leather chair, frail, thin, but alive in a way Alexander hadn't seen in years. Sitting across from him, holding his hands, was Clara, the maid. The maid he'd barely noticed all these years. The maid who dusted the library and served tea quietly in corners. The maid who, right now, was teaching his father to sing. Yes, sing. A broken, halting melody, each word trembling out of Henry's throat, while Clara guided him gently, patiently, as though coaxing life itself back into him. Alexander froze in the doorway. The world tilted, and for the first time in decades, the man who had everything, billions, power, and empire, realized he had missed everything that truly mattered. Alexander Blackwood was not used to freezing. He was a man who made others freeze. Markets, boardrooms, even governments leaned when he entered a room. His life had been a relentless march forward. Private schools, Ivy League brilliance, first hedge fund at 25, billionaire by 30. His empire spanned continents, but his home, it was empty. His father, Henry Blackwood, had once been the opposite of Alexander. Where Alexander was sharp angles and biting precision, Henry had been warmth, laughter, the kind of man who would roll up his sleeves at the town fair and fix a stranger's broken fence. He was known for generosity, but then came the stroke, the silence, and the long decline. Alexander hadn't known how to handle it, so he did what he knew best. He buried himself in numbers, contracts, flights, and acquisitions. To the world, he was a visionary. To his father, he feared he had become a stranger. The memories haunted him. Nights when Henry sat at the dinner table, eyes begging to speak, while Alexander scrolled through earnings reports. The empty chair where his mother used to sit, her jasmine candles burning like quiet reproaches. The promises he once made to her, to take care of his father, to never let him fade into loneliness. And now here was Clara, the maid, doing what he, Alexander Blackwood, son and heir, had failed to do. He studied her in the dim lamplight. She was no older than 30, plain uniform, hair tied back simply, yet her presence radiated something more valuable than all the paintings on the walls. Patience, devotion, courage. She was holding his father's trembling hand as if it were a priceless artifact. Alexander's chest tightened. How long had this been going on? How long had his father been finding pieces of himself in the company of someone Alexander had barely acknowledged? For the first time in years, the billionaire felt something unfamiliar. Not anger, not superiority, shame. And beneath it, a question that unsettled him more than any hostile takeover ever had. What kind of son had he become? The house smelled faintly of cedar and old books, the kind of scent that pulled Alexander backward through time. His eyes wandered from Clara's bowed head to the mantel, where a small wooden box sat, dusty, nearly forgotten. That box. It was the only thing his mother had left for him the night she passed. Inside were two things: a pressed jasmine flower, fragile as breath, and a simple pocket watch that belonged to Henry. She had held Alexander's hand that night, her voice weak but clear. "You'll inherit more than money, Alex. You'll inherit his time. Don't waste it." He had tucked the box away after her funeral, too busy to deal with what it represented. But standing here now, hearing Clara's soft humming as Henry's fingers tapped against hers, Alexander felt the weight of that forgotten promise slam back into his chest. He remembered being 12, sitting on the porch with his father. Henry was polishing that very watch, the evening sun bouncing off its silver surface. "Time is the only fortune we can't buy back," Henry had said, sliding it into Alexander's palm. "One day, when you're too busy chasing the world, remember this: come back home." Alexander had nodded back then, eager, innocent, but he hadn't remembered, not once until now. He stared at Clara, watching the way she leaned close so Henry could see her lips as she spoke slowly, carefully, making sure he understood. His father's eyes lit up, struggling but present, the sight carved into Alexander's chest like glass. Clara wasn't just caring for Henry, she was giving him back time, the very thing Alexander had thrown away in boardrooms and mergers. And suddenly, Alexander realized this wasn't simply about a maid doing her duty. This was about love, loyalty, and a truth he had ignored for years. But shadows of suspicion crept in too. Clara was an employee, yes, but why this devotion? Why this intimacy? And why did his father's hand clutch hers with such trust, as if she carried secrets Alexander had no right to? That thought hit him harder than anything else. What if he no longer truly knew his own father? What if this maid knew him better than his own son did? The air thickened in the mansion, like a storm was swelling inside its walls. Alexander could hear the ticking of the old clock above the fireplace, each second gnawing at him, pushing him toward questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Clara rose from Henry's side when she noticed Alexander still standing in the doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes flicking nervously toward the floor, then back up to meet his. There was something in her expression that unsettled him. Not guilt exactly, but a fierce protectiveness, as if she were bracing herself for a blow. "To Mr. Sterling," she said softly, her voice careful, "your father wasn't expecting you." The way she said it felt loaded. Henry wasn't expecting him because Alexander never came, and they both knew it. That truth stung worse than any insult. But before Alexander could respond, the heavy stomp of footsteps echoed from the hall. A man appeared, his presence slicing through the room like a blade. Marcus, the estate's longtime property manager. Sharp suit, slicked hair, and a smile that never reached his eyes. "Ah," Marcus said, voice dripping with sarcasm, "the prodigal son returns." "Unannounced, of course. Clara, hasn't anyone told you? Surprise visits don't look good when there are arrangements being kept." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Arrangements?" he repeated. Marcus walked closer, his polished shoes clacking against the hardwood floor. He carried a folder in one hand, tapping it against his thigh with practiced arrogance. "Your father's affairs have been managed. Clara here has been indispensable, though some might say perhaps too indispensable." Clara stiffened, her fists clenching at her sides. Henry's eyes darted between them, a flicker of panic cutting through his weakened expression. He tried to lift his hand as if to wave Marcus away, but the old man's frailty betrayed him. Alexander's heart thudded. The insinuation was clear. Marcus wasn't just hinting at impropriety. He was planting seeds of doubt, suggesting betrayal, suggesting that Clara's care came at a price, maybe more than just money. Alexander took a step forward. "What exactly are you implying, Marcus?" Marcus smirked, sliding the folder open. Inside were documents, contracts, invoices, legal papers, all bearing signatures. "Let's just say your father's fortune has been redistributed in places you may not have approved. And Clara? Well, she seems to have been around for most of it. Loyal, devoted Clara." The words hit like gunfire. Alexander's gaze snapped to Clara, whose face flushed with anger. "That's a lie," she said, her voice breaking with restrained fury. "Everything I've done is for him, because you, Marcus, only care about bleeding him dry." Marcus's smirk widened. "Oh, come now. Let's not get emotional. Loyalty is such a flexible word when there are millions at stake." The room felt like it was closing in. Alexander could see his father's trembling hand reaching toward Clara, desperation in his eyes. The old man was trying to speak, to defend her, but his voice cracked and failed him. And in that moment, Alexander realized he wasn't just battling suspicion in his own heart. He was staring at a true predator. Marcus had power, influence, and clearly control over much of the estate. But Clara stood in his way. The stage was set. The clash wasn't just about loyalty or money anymore. It was about who truly cared for Henry Sterling, and who was willing to destroy everything for control. The storm outside had broken, lightning tearing across the sky, rattling the tall windows of Sterling Manor. Inside, the tension had become unbearable. Alexander's chest heaved as his eyes darted between Marcus, smug and calculating, and Clara, who stood like a shield in front of Henry's fragile frame. "Enough games," Alexander growled, his voice echoing with a force that even surprised himself. "If you've stolen from my father, Marcus, I'll tear this house down around you to prove it." Marcus tilted his head, amused. "Stolen? Such a heavy word. Everything here is signed, documented, legal. If your father didn't want it, why would he give it?" He snapped the folder shut and laid it on the desk with a sinister finality. Henry tried to speak again, his voice gravelly with age. "I didn't." His hand shook violently. Clara rushed to hold it steady, whispering, "Save your strength." But Henry's eyes, fierce and desperate, locked onto Alexander's. Alexander knelt beside his father, clutching his frail hand. "Tell me, Dad, did you sign these? Did you give him this power?" Henry's lips trembled. He turned his head toward Marcus, and for the first time in years, the old patriarch's voice cut like steel. "He forged them." The words cracked the air like thunder. Marcus's smirk faltered just for a second, but it was enough. Clara seized the moment, pulling from her pocket a small leather notebook. Worn, faded, its corners fraying. She slammed it onto the desk. "This," she said fiercely, "is the truth." Alexander stared. The notebook was his mother's, a journal Henry had kept hidden away after her passing. Clara opened it with trembling fingers, revealing meticulous notes, dates, meetings, records of conversations, even warnings scribbled in Henry's hand about Marcus's untrustworthy dealings. "You see?" Clara's voice wavered but did not break. "He trusted me with this because he knew Marcus would try to bury him alive under lies. Every signature, every document Marcus waved around. Henry documented his refusals." "His refusals, Alexander." The thunder outside seemed to roar in unison with her words. Alexander's vision blurred with rage. He lunged at Marcus, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the oak-paneled wall. The folder fell to the ground, papers scattering like broken promises. "You snake," Alexander hissed. "You thought you could isolate him? Make me doubt her. Make me doubt my own blood." Marcus clawed at Alexander's grip, his smug veneer cracking into raw panic. "You have no proof. Courts don't care about scribbled notebooks." But then Henry's frail hand rose again, shaking but determined. "Witnesses." Clara saw. She heard. "I wrote everything." His voice broke, but his eyes burned with a father's last fight. "And my son will finish what I couldn't." The words lit a fire inside Alexander. He released Marcus, who stumbled forward and, face pale. Clara rushed to Henry's side, tears glistening but her posture unyielding. For the first time, Alexander saw her not as a maid, not as a shadow in his father's house, but as the silent guardian who had been keeping the truth alive when no one else would. The storm outside howled, rattling the very bones of the manor. And in that moment, Marcus realized the empire he thought he controlled was collapsing. His lies had been pierced, his arrogance exposed. And Alexander Sterling, once an absent heir, now stood reborn as a son, a protector, and a man determined to finish the fight. The storm finally broke into silence, the rain softening against the windows of Sterling Manor, as though nature itself had exhausted its fury. The living room, however, was still charged with a different kind of electricity, the kind that comes when lies collapse under the unbearable weight of truth. Marcus staggered backward, his composure shattered, his once confident smirk now twisted into a desperate sneer. You think anyone will believe this?" he spat, pointing at Clara, his voice trembling. "She's just the maid. No one listens to people like her." Alexander stepped forward, his voice steady and sharp. "Maybe not in your world, Marcus, but in mine, they'll listen to the truth." He bent down, collecting the scattered papers Marcus had tried to use as weapons. Holding them beside his mother's journal, he could see the contradictions plainly. The signatures Marcus had boasted about were jagged imitations, the dates clashing with Henry's notes. Forgery, plain as day. Henry, weak but resolute, whispered, "Call the lawyer, call the press. No more shadows." Clara's eyes welled with tears, but her voice rose with steel. "I'll testify. I was here when he cornered Mr. Sterling. I was here when he refused to sign. I've carried these memories for years, waiting for the moment when someone would finally believe me." And Alexander, his chest heavy with shame for all the years he had been blind, reached for her hand. "I believe you. And I swear the world will too." Marcus tried to bolt for the door, but Alexander intercepted him, his grip like iron. "Not this time. You don't walk away from this." The days that followed unraveled like a carefully staged play, except Marcus was no longer the director. Lawyers pored over documents, handwriting experts confirmed the forgeries, and the journal Clara had guarded like a sacred relic became the linchpin of Henry's defense. The courtroom, weeks later, was packed to the brim. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled, and the world leaned in to witness the downfall of a man who had thought himself untouchable. Marcus sat at the defendant's table, sweat glistening on his forehead, while Clara, dressed not in her maid's uniform but in a simple, elegant dress, took the stand. Her testimony was steady, her words cutting like truth forged in fire. She spoke of long nights spent at Henry's side, of Marcus's manipulations, of the day he laughed while Henry's hands trembled over the documents. She spoke not with bitterness, but with conviction. The conviction of someone who had been silenced too long and finally found her voice. Alexander watched her, pride swelling in his chest. And when the verdict was delivered, guilty of fraud, guilty of coercion, guilty of theft, the courtroom erupted. Marcus was led away in handcuffs, his empire of lies reduced to rubble. But the true victory was not just in the conviction. It was in Henry's quiet smile as he sat beside his son and Clara, his frail hand resting on theirs. "You've both saved me," he whispered. "And maybe this family too." Clara looked down, overwhelmed, and Alexander whispered back, "No. You saved us. You kept the truth alive when I was too blind to see it." Outside the courthouse, the media clamored for a statement. Alexander stepped forward, Clara at his side, and spoke into the sea of microphones. "This isn't just about one man's greed. It's about listening to the people we ignore, the people we dismiss, the people who carry our burdens without recognition." Clara was called a maid, but she was a guardian of truth. And if we can't honor that, then what does any of our wealth or power mean? The crowd fell silent, struck by the raw honesty of his words. In the weeks that followed, Sterling Industries underwent a transformation. Clara was no longer the maid. She was offered a role of true leadership, her insight and loyalty recognized at last. Alexander devoted himself to reshaping the empire, not as a monument to wealth, but as a legacy of integrity his mother would have been proud of. And Henry, though frail and fading, lived to see his family's name restored, his last days lit not by shame, but by the pride of knowing his son had finally found his strength. The storm that had begun with suspicion and betrayal ended with redemption, truth, and a family reborn. Because in the end, lies can build empires, but only truth can make them last. If you were Alexander, standing between loyalty and truth, whose voice would you believe? And if you were Clara, silenced for years, Would you have had the courage to speak? Think about it. And never forget, sometimes the strongest warriors wear the quietest faces. If this story moved you, share it, because truth deserves to be heard.